Atenção, meus caros, aqui no meu canal. Hoje é um vídeo muito especial aqui, em que nós temos o grande prazer de receber o professor e doutor Taylor Marshall. Nós vamos conversar muito com ele sobre este livro aqui, Os Infiltrados, que é um livro que ele publicou há um tempo atrás. Eu tenho a versão dele em inglês, mas esta versão aqui foi traduzida para o português. Nós vamos conhecer mais da vida do Dr. Taylor Marshall, sua família, sua história de conversão, e também falar especificamente sobre este livro que o motivou, as histórias por trás, as controvérsias, as várias documentações que ele levanta durante o período que ele fez este livro, também que está aqui colocado, as soluções que ele propõe, vamos dizer assim, as abordagens espirituais que ele faz no livro, que são muito importantes, e é um vídeo que serve para motivar você a ler este livro sobre infiltração na igreja, que é um tipo de denúncia que eu já venho fazendo há algum tempo no meu canal, inclusive me tornei conhecido no Brasil e fora do Brasil por causa disso, e hoje nós temos o prazer de trazer o Dr. Taylor Marshall aqui para o canal. A entrevista será toda em inglês, portanto, nós teremos aqui legendas para você que não tem, vamos dizer, acesso à língua inglesa, então teremos aqui legendas para vocês em português, para que vocês possam compreender tudo, tintim por tintim, que o Dr. Taylor Marshall e eu conversamos. É importante, então, que você preste atenção na entrevista, e o link para você adquirir o livro está na descrição deste vídeo, logo aqui embaixo. Então, eu vou começar a conversar com o Dr. Taylor Marshall agora em inglês. Você fique muito ligado, acompanhe. Nós teremos agora o prazer da entrevista com este grande homem aí da igreja, que eu tive o prazer de conhecer no Sínodo da Amazônia pessoalmente, não é mesmo? Então, vamos lá. Dr. Taylor Marshall, welcome to my channel. It's a great pleasure.
Bernardo, great to be here. When I was in Rome last year, everybody said, you've got to talk to Bernardo Küster. You got it? Everyone was talking about Bernardo. So it's good to connect.
Yes. We met in Rome. Great month.
Great, yes.
Yes.
Lots have happened since then.
Yes. I think we should, everybody that was there during the Synod should write a book about it, of their personal experience during that month.
Yes.
Okay, so Taylor, before we start to talk about your book specifically, I want you to talk about your personal life and your family, because most of Brazilians, they do not know you. So talk about your family. You have a big family, and where you live in the United States, what do you do for a living, so Brazilians can know you.
Sure. Before I was a Catholic, I was an Anglican or Episcopalian priest, and I was studying and was convicted about the truths and the claims of the Catholic Church. And my wife and I, as we prayed and we were involved in pro-life work, we actually went to Rome for a visit, and we were able to go to Mass with Pope Benedict XVI and just see so many of the beautiful churches and the relics and the shrines, and the Holy Ghost touched us and we became Catholics. And Joy and I, we have 8 children together, and primarily what I do is I do online shows, Catholic programming, broadcasts on YouTube. But the main thing is I run and operate the New St. Thomas Institute, and we do online courses all over the world. We have a lot of Brazilians in there, actually. I think about 50 nations are represented in the Institute, and we do, Catholic philosophy, Catholic theology, church history, apologetics, Old Testament, New Testament. Right now we're doing a year-long course on the Roman Rite and the traditional Latin Mass, and the formation of the liturgy and the Mass and all these things. So it's very exciting. It's very neat to be able to do all these online courses and to have students all over the world, including down there in Brazil.
Great. In the end of your book, I'm going to read it in English, but in the chapter 33, called Spiritual Weapons Against Demonic Enemies, you quote Pope St. Pius X, when he says, in our time more than ever before, the chief strength of our wicked lies in the cowardice and weakness of good men. So do you feel like a call to not be these good and silent men?
Well, I mean, this is a great time to be a Catholic, and it's very difficult. I know a lot of us are discouraged because there's scandals. You know, there's sexual scandals, and there's financial scandals, and there's moral scandals, and doctrinal scandals, and you can be discouraged to be a Catholic. It can be embarrassing at times because you see things on the news, and your family and your friends say, "Oh, did you hear about that priest or that Monsignor or that bishop or that Pope?" But also, we have to realize that to be a Christian, to be a Catholic, a disciple of Jesus Christ, means that we focus on Jesus Christ. Our focus isn't primarily on what's going on at the local parish or what's going on in church politics. Ultimately, we're called to follow Jesus and do whatever it takes that we would be sanctified, we would become saints, and that our family would become saints, and that we wouldn't give up. That's the difficulty. That's the struggle. I mean, that's the struggle that I feel today. And I think if we take up the traditional Catholic norms of piety, I mean the traditional liturgies, the rosaries, the novenas, Marian devotion, scripture reading, all of these traditional means by which the saints before became holy, I think we'll have more encouragement and more hope, and we won't be that silent group who allows evil to take over and destroy not only our church, but our families and our governments and our societies.
Good. I have a question. It's not concerned about the book, but about these times of the Chinese virus, the coronavirus they're living now. Do you have mass in your town, in your states?
We've been very blessed because in the height of the corona hype, we were able to go to covert masses, so not public masses. Traditional Latin masses were offered, and then fortunately our local bishop about a month ago opened up the masses, and so we've been able to attend mass and have our confessions since Easter. Not on Easter, but after Easter, things opened up here. So we've been blessed. I mean, we can go to confession, we can go into our church, we go to mass. There are masks and there are some distancing, but in general, it's somewhat back to normal. It's a blessing. How about you?
Yeah, here in Brazil, the situation is quite a bit different because the bishops are now trying to keep the masses away from the people.
Mm-hmm.
And they are not concerned about this Antifas and all these protests that we have here also in Brazil because of all this George Floyd thing in the United States. And now some bishops, some priests are now opening the masses, but with a lot of restrictions. But my bishop here particularly, he didn't open still. We do not have masses now. For example, yesterday, which was the Sunday, we have a mass here in my house. So we have to call the priest. We have a Latin mass here. I call some friends, and then we have dinner. And so I feel like in the catacombs,
Exactly.
as the first Christians were the Christians under the communist regime. So the media here in Brazil now, they're concerned about the government, but they say, oh, he's not doing anything about the coronavirus. But they praise all this gatherings and these Antifas and these protests and everything else, and they do not say anything about the social distances and stuff. Yeah, it's incredible. But let's touch on the important issues here and now talk about your book. And the first thing I would like to know is this book might be considered a traditionalist book, for example, a fascist book, a book that is promoting some extreme, outright conservative ideologies and ideas. So how would you respond to these accusations, Taylor?
Yeah, well, the premise of the book is that the Catholic Church is currently in the worst state she has ever experienced in 2,000 years. And I'm talking again, like I mentioned before, financial scandals, sexual scandals, pedophilia, and moral and doctrinal confusion in the Catholic Church. And then add to that this whole COVID-19 corona crisis, and we have churches closed, and no public masses even on Easter Sunday. So we're in a big mess. And I wanted to figure out, how did we get to such a sad state? And I began doing research for this book. And, a lot of people say, oh, the problems go back to the 60s. It's the Vatican II problem. And of course, I've always been sympathetic to that narrative. But as I began to study that, I realized, well, no, there are problems already in the 50s and the 40s. And then actually you start to see the problems of the modernist controversy under Pius X. So now you're in the early 1900s. And then you have, Freemasonic problems, Our Lady of La Salette, Marian apparition, showing that no, there's an infiltration and a compromise in the 1800s. So this book, Infiltration, sort of begins the story in the 1840s. And it explains how the elites, the intellectuals, the secret societies in the 1800s, which were really getting strong after the French Revolution, how they were able to infiltrate governments, but in particular, their plan. There's a document called the Permanent Instruction of the Alta Vendita, and it's a secret society plan by the Carbonari on how they will eventually get a pope who holds to secular, humanist, Freemasonic ideals. Communism, all religions being equal, all religions pointing to the same God, nothing distinctive about Christ or the Catholic Church or the seven sacraments. So this happens in the 1840s, 1850s, and I kind of just trace the lines and the dots through Our Lady of La Salette, the St. Michael prayer and vision that Leo XIII had, Pius X and his fight with the modernists and the heretics, Our Lady of Fatima, 1917, the Lateran Treaty, and then into the 50s, and then ultimately into the 60s, where you have the Second Vatican Council, in which the liturgies for all seven sacraments were changed, and then on with more and more corrupt cardinals and the sex abuse crisis, which begins in the 70s, really starts to culminate in the 90s and in the 2000s. And so I don't really, people, when the book came out a year ago in English, people said, oh, there's a lot of conspiracy theories. Bernardo, no one is making that allegation against me 1 year later. In fact, I was just on Twitter this morning and someone said, everyone who said that Marshall's book Infiltration was just a conspiracy theory should apologize, because 1 year later, we have seen not only all the churches being closed, not only the Abu Dhabi document that Francis put out, but also the Pachamama incident, in which there were idols, statues that weren't Christian in St. Peter's, in the Church of Santa Maria, even maybe on the altar, depending on how you interpret things. So there's a lot going on here, and it's not just something that began with Pope Francis, and it's not just something that began with Vatican II. It goes back even further, and I really just see this as a historical argument. There's nothing particularly traditionalist about it. I don't think there's anything fascist about it. The book is primarily the story. It reads kind of like a novel, because it goes so fast and there's so much interesting history, but it's really just a history book. It gives you the past 200 years of church history, and it connects all the dots. So you finally say, oh, that's why the liturgy looks like that, or that's why those guys got to become cardinals, those bad guys that got to become cardinals. So I think it sort of, it gives you what we call, I don't know what the Portuguese word is, but the meta-narrative, like the bird's eye view.
Yeah, it's that, a meta-narrative, it's the same.
Okay, good. Yeah, meta-narrative. The book is a meta-narrative for 200 years of understanding what's going on in the Catholic Church.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of the Robert Hugh Benson, Lord of the World.
Yeah, right. But not fiction, yeah.
Yeah, but you're trying to give a broad picture of the scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Because I see a lot of Catholics that come to me and they say, oh, Bernard, you have to see that all the problems in the church come back to Vatican II. I say, yes and no, because everything you explained, the infiltration, as you call it, and it's a perfect term, started way before. So your motivation to do this book, what was the moment? When was it? When you said, okay, I have to write this thing and publish it?
Well, I'm a convert. I wasn't raised a Catholic. I imagine most Brazilians were raised Catholic, most likely, but I wasn't. I wasn't raised. I became a Catholic when I was, I don't know, 28 or something like that. and I'd already been trained in a different Protestant tradition. So I made a detailed study, and then I made an act of the will and chose to become a Catholic. And then when I became a Catholic, after over a decade of being a Catholic, I was just so confused. I lost my bearings because
it was an intellectual conversion, so to speak.
Well, of course, because I hadn't been raised in it. I just read the books, I read
just like Chesterton.
Yeah, I read or even Benson. I read the Council of Trent, and I read the great saints. I read the popular literature like Saint Therese, the Little Flower, but I also read some Robert Bellarmine and some Saint Thomas Aquinas and some Bonaventure and Augustine, and I realized this is the truth. But then, when I went to the Catholic Mass, there's banners and folksy music, and they're receiving communion in a line. They're lined up and no one's kneeling. I mean, as Anglicans, we knelt to receive communion at a rail. There's no rail, or if there was a rail, they weren't using the rail. They're receiving in the hand. The priest was more informal, and so it was just, the things that I read didn't match up with the things I was experiencing. And then that's one element. And the other element, it was just the disappointment of the leadership, of covering up sins, covering up scandals. And this happens amongst liberals. It also happens amongst conservatives. So I just wanted to understand, how is it that when I'm reading, say, St. Thomas Aquinas or Robert Bellarmine, when they're talking about Catholicism, it's not what I'm seeing in the local arena, right? So I wanted to figure that out. Where did it go wrong? And most people say it's Vatican II, and I agree. But Vatican II was sort of what I call in the book, it was the parade of what had already been happening for 100 years. It was out in front. It was in your face, and they finally made it public. But I found that no, this was actually something that had been happening strongly in the early 1900s, and then in the 19-teens and the 1920s. This was a big fight going on in the church. So I think it's important for people to realize that it's not just Pope Francis, it's not just Vatican II, that there's something that's slow, and ultimately, in the beginning of the book, focused on this. Ultimately, it's demonic. See, that's the thing. You got to realize that ultimately, this is a demonic plan to destroy the faith of people and to lead them to everlasting damnation. That's the ultimate plan of the dark forces.
Yeah, and you use the Paul VI figure, the smoke of Satan. I feel the same, because when I converted to the Catholic faith, it was already the time of Pope Francis, and I longed for a church I didn't know at the time,
right.
And I still don't know. I see some glimpses here, some points here, but I feel that the air is smoked, and I cannot see the things proper. So I think your research, historically speaking, was very good, and you put all the thoughts together to clear a vision and talk about this demonic plot. Because when you call it the plot, or in Portuguese, a trama, it's almost the same. You talk about a mind behind it.
Correct.
Like a supernatural intelligence behind it. That it is like, pulling the strings to do it and put all things together to destroy the church. So ultimately, you start with this, and then in the end, you propose some spiritual solutions or weapons or practices that all Catholics must put into their lives to help to destroy this plot, isn't it? So, and I think that two questions that I have is, why did you give so much emphasis to Our Lady in La Salette and Our Lady in Fatima? Why are these two apparitions so important and received so much importance in your book?
Well, if the Blessed Virgin Mary gets off her throne at the right hand of Jesus and comes down to talk to us, that's important. That's important. And I wanted to stress both of those apparitions and her engagement with humanity, because, it's one thing to say, oh, the Freemasons, were up to this, and they published this document, and they were, infiltrating these seminaries and these dioceses and these bishops and these cardinals. But it's another thing if you get the Blessed Mother, the Mother of Jesus Christ, saying the same thing. And when you read Our Lady of La Salette, and there's two versions of Our Lady of La Salette, both are in the appendix of the book, and I explained why there are two visions and why they're both legit and valid, because a lot of people will discount one of them. She talks about how the Church of Rome will go into eclipse. She talks about persecution of the papacy. She talks about how people need to stop saying Christ's name in vain, God's name in vain. They need to stop desecrating Sundays. They need to rest and go to Mass and worship God. And then in Fatima, she gives the 3 secrets. And we know from at least part of the 3rd secret that there's a vision of the Pope, a bishop in white, and a city half in ruin. And so all of these things kind of come together and tell us the same story, which is a church which is losing her influence, and not just losing her influence, but actually being eclipsed. The Pope being persecuted, perhaps the Pope, it looks like, even being murdered, martyred, and killed, and some great crisis in which the world is left in some kind of ruin. All of these things come together to say the church as we know it in the last 150 years is not in a normal state. It's not normal. We have a extreme situation on our hands. And so I think if you bring in the supernatural, which is Our Lady, you begin to see that you can't just say this is a conspiracy theory. Otherwise, you have to say either the Blessed Virgin Mary is wrong, or these apparitions are fake, and the church has approved both of them. I'm not using crazy, odd apparitions. These are mainstream Marian apparitions with feast days on the calendar. So I think that brings substance to the argument, because you get to look at it from the perspective of the Virgin Mary, the Theotokos, and then you also get to see it from the perspective of what the popes are saying in their encyclicals, and what's going on in Europe, and then from Europe to the seminaries and dioceses around the world.
Okay, so you start your book with this Mary apparitions, and you talk it along the book, but in the beginning you talk about the smoke of Satan, which was the phrase used by the Pope Paul VI. So what did he mean about it? What he was saying or referring to?
Well, yeah, Paul VI in the 1970s, says the smoke of Satan has entered the church through a crack or through a fissure. I don't know how you would say it in Portuguese, but he's referring to the smoke of Satan. This is Satan's air, his vapor, his smoke is in the church. It's got into the church. And so, I did a search in the scriptures, and I looked for every single place smoke appeared. Every place except for one place, smoke is usually a sign of God's presence, and it's a good thing. It's associated with incense. But there's one place in the Bible where smoke is associated with evil, and that is in the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse. And in the Apocalypse, we see when the abyss, hell, is opened for Satan to do his final plan, his cunning on earth, smoke comes up from the abyss. And this is the smoke of Satan. So it's a reference to the Apocalypse. It's a reference to the book of Revelation. And I think that's important for us in our time to realize that whatever you think of Paul VI, he was referring to the smoke of Satan, which is a theme, a sign in the book of Revelation, in the Apocalypse. That's why it's so important.
Great. And you justify all this infiltration with the spiritual infiltration. You talk about this with the smoke of Satan. And then before talking about the communist infiltration in the church, and you quote Belladonna and all the others that gave testimony about it, you talk about secret societies and the modernism in the church. Could you give us that and talk about in a nutshell about it?
Sure. Yeah. So beginning in the 1800s, you have Pius IX, you have Leo XIII, you have Pius X, they're all talking, and even before that, you have all these popes talking about secret societies. Now, in the American context, in the Anglo-American context, we usually use the term Freemasonic. However, in France and Italy, there are different terms. So generically, we use the term secret societies. So you have to remember, in the 1700s and in the early 1800s, if you were an intellectual and you said, we need to kill all the kings, we need to put democracy in, we need to have economic socialism, we need to remove the Catholic Church and make all religions equal. If you say things like that in the 1700s, even still, you could be killed or persecuted or lose your status in society. So the men who were playing with these ideas and teaching these ideas joined secret societies. These are societies that men, intellectual men, join, and they discuss these plans, and then they also plot these plans. So this is the origins. I mean, people say that the secret societies, the Freemasons, started in 1717 in England, in London. People debate that. I kind of talk about the origins of the Freemasonic secret societies in the book, but 1717 is kind of a good start date for these societies. And they kind of culminate in the French Revolution. And then after the French Revolution, they realized that bloody revolution, guillotine, doesn't work. Ultimately, they need to change the way that they do revolution, and that is subversive, quiet revolution. So instead of killing everyone in 1 year, let's take 30 years and change the university system, change the political system, change elementary schools, right? Introduce women in the workplace, sexual revolution, all these things that have happened over the past 150 years. It's slower, you have to be patient, but it's much more effective and lasting, because instead of just killing everyone who disagrees with you, over time you persuade them, or at least force them with social pressure to agree with you. And so, pick any current social movement. I mean, we're seeing a big one right now in the United States, several of them. There's immense pressure on everybody in society to get on board and to express it on Facebook, Twitter, at work, at their jobs, everything. This is the success of the secret society, so much so that they no longer have to be secret, Bernardo. They can be on television. I mean, we have our popular shows, Ellen and Oprah, and these shows, the night news. They're all promoting what 250 years ago would have been treasonous. They're promoting it in the open.
Yeah. This is, I think, one of the points that are important to talk here is they are not just promoting ideas in churches and elementary schools and universities and churches and catechesis and all of that, but I think the most important thing is they're hiding the tradition of the church. They are hiding the good theologians, the good saints, the doctrine of the church. They are hiding this. It's like a culture of hiding everything from us. So in this book, we can find a lot of lines to go, the lines of the traditional movement within the church that tried and is still trying to preserve the tradition of the church, or the tradition of the liturgy, or the tradition of the doctrine of faith, or the devotion to Our Lady and the saints, and the Thomistic theology and everything else. So this hiding strategy is very effective, because they're not just trying to shape your mind. You're just now giving some barriers so you cannot know the truth, or just some very small part of it, and they can manipulate you in this way. So, and then we go to the other strategy, or the other movement, which is the communist movement. And you talk a lot about that. Could you give us some examples and talk about this? Because this is one of the main works I'm doing now, and I'm producing a movie now called They're Among Us, about the communist infiltration within the church, almost particularly in Brazil.
Yeah. Well, it goes back, communism and the occult all go back to these secret society Freemasonic associations. Just yesterday, Bernardo, Archbishop Vigano, the whistleblower, Archbishop who exposed Cardinal McCarrick and exposed the Vatican bank scandals, he wrote an open letter to President Donald Trump.
Yeah, I read it. Incredible.
It's incredible. And
it's strong too.
It's very strong. And in that letter, Bernardo, he makes a reference to a Latin inscription, Solve et coagula.
Yes, it's an alchemist.
It's an alchemist. J.K. Rowling, the author of Harry Potter, has it tattooed on her wrist. It's also tattooed on the forearms of Baphomet. Do you know what Baphomet is?
Yeah.
So it's a alchemy slogan, which means solve, dissolve, separate, and coagula. We have an English word, coagulate. It means like congeal.
It's almost the same.
All the same. It's all Latin. Yeah. Portuguese is Latin. So what the idea is in alchemy is you dissolve the elements that are base and lower, and you bring them together into gold by magic. Well, I think it's genius because Archbishop Vigano wrote Trump, and he included this. He's told him to beware of this, and he put the Masonic Latin slogan "Solve et coagula" to beware of this because, and it's a sign of Baphomet, who's a demonic idol, but it's also a social reality, and it's the reality that the communists always impose on society. First, you must dissolve society. You must destroy what has been built, and then you have to congeal it, coagulate it, and bring it back into something that's new. And this new form is the communist structure. It destroys the family. It destroys the church. It destroys the economy. It's a completely new thing that's supposed to be gold, but it's actually fool's gold. It's fake gold. And this is the lie that Satan told to Eve. He said, no, by your human nature, you can become as gods. This is the infiltration of Judas Iscariot. You were just talking, Bernardo, about how these clergy, they hide the true saints. They hide the doctrine. They hide the liturgy. They hide all the jewels of the Catholic faith. But it's not just that they hide it, they actually manipulate them and use them as props. So they use the liturgy, they use the mitre, they use the crozier, they use the cathedral, they use all the icons and images of Catholicism, but they subvert it. So it's just like Judas, he kisses Jesus. Kissing is an affection, but behind the kiss is the betrayal.
Yeah, it's just like what the Pope Benedict XVI said, that the liberation theology is not a heresy. It's something else because they use the language and everything else, and they fake to be Catholics, but they change the meaning of the words using the same words.
Yeah, they're pretending. It's like, I'm kissing Jesus. I'm honoring Jesus, but it's all fake. It's a betrayal. The kiss is a sign to hand him over to his enemies, and that's what's going on. And so, I mean, infiltration is not just something that happened 200 years ago. It's actually rooted in the Christian message. Jesus said, there will be sheep in wolf's clothing among you. There will be false prophets. There will be false messiahs. Jesus said all this would happen. So that is one thing that's encouraging, Bernardo, is, people say Protestants, evangelicals, charismatics, they say, well, look at all the corruption in the Catholic Church, and how can this be the true church? Christ, the King of the Church, said there will be false shepherds. There will be wolves. There will be weeds amongst the wheat. So it's not surprising that the church in every generation will have a new crop of weeds, a new crop of infiltration that happens over and over. And communism is the political manifestation of the spiritual things that we're talking about here. So if you level out all religions, all gods, all scriptures, all traditions, they're all equal. There's nothing left. Communism is taking that to the political and economic level and taking away all hierarchy, all structure, all merit. You can't say that worker is better than that worker because they're both going to get paid the same. Likewise, you can't say Catholicism is better than Islam, or Catholicism is better than Hinduism.
or the Indian pagan religions.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So communism is just the political and economic manifestation of the same spiritual lie, which is the alchemy, which is solve et coagula. I hope you can put that on the screen somehow of the Baphomet and show the tattoos on Baphomet's arm. Solve et coagula, because this is the demonic lie. Yeah. This is the demonic lie. And Vigano's on it. Vigano is telling Trump, this is it.
Yeah. Our job, I think your job and my job is well expressed here in your book when you talk about St. Francis de Sales, Introduction to the Devout Life. You quote, the declared enemies of God and his church, heretics and schismatics, must be criticized and must, as possible, as long as truth is not denied. It's a work of charity to shout, here's the wolf, when it enters the flock or anywhere else. This is important. So, yes. People, this book is showing all this information and a lot of more information, a lot of footnotes too, for books and articles you must research and read more. It's a book that show you a lot of books to read. And we go to the very important issue. I think it's one of the most controversial discussions among the Catholics. It's the Second Vatican Council. That is a great topic in our book, because we talk about the previous popes, the election of the popes during before the council, during the council, and after the council. So, was there infiltration in the Vatican II, and what is it? Why did you put there about in this topic of infiltration in the book?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the first thing to remember is Our Lady of Fatima said that the third secret should be opened in 1960, and John the 23rd actually opened it early, which I don't think was a good thing. It shows kind of a bit of disobedience, but he opened it in 1959. He said, this is not for my time. This is not for my pontificate. And then he called the council, Vatican II, Second Vatican Council. He had a bunch of schemata, drafts that were prepared that were actually pretty good. People, conservative, Orthodox people, thought they were going to be good. Unfortunately, as soon as the Second Vatican Council began, there was a coup. There was an infiltration. Everybody, 100% of people agree on this. This is not just a conspiracy theory or traditionalist perspective, but everybody realizes that all of the original schemata were trashed. They were dismissed. They were voted out. And they said, we're going to rewrite everything. Everything that was prepared for the council, gone. We're rewriting everything. And that was the first domino that fell in Vatican II. John the 23rd eventually died, and they elected Paul VI. And in the book, I show that Paul VI has connections with the banks in Milan, but he also has connections with Saul Alinsky, who's a major American communist who wrote the Rules for Radicals, which is actually dedicated to Satan. And it shows how to subvert societies and move them. Remember, he talked about the careful, quiet communism that takes time. Saul Alinsky literally wrote the book on that. We know that he met with Paul VI 3 times, and that Paul VI read his books. So I see Paul VI as a shadowy character, and I give other examples of that. But the council culminated in 1965 and produced all the documents. And the key to understanding Vatican II is that it contains weaponized ambiguity. They write things so it could be maybe considered conservative or in line with tradition, or it could be interpreted in another way. And so this is why you've had 50 plus years of fighting over what does Vatican II say. Nobody knows. It's written with weaponized ambiguity. Nobody argues over Vatican I. Everybody knows exactly what Vatican I teaches because it's written in clear language. Council of Trent. Nobody argues over what Trent said. It was written in clear language. Vatican II was not. And Paul VI, when he closed the council, said that the council itself was not infallible. This is key. So this is how I think we Catholics can understand that, yes, a council happened, but this council has an asterisk next to it. It was not infallible. And the way it was handled was not the way any previous council had ever been handled. And I think everybody agrees that Vatican II is a unique council. It's a pastoral council, as they say. And then you just look at the numbers, and I document all the numbers. Baptisms go down, ordinations go down, women religious go down, confirmations go down, birth rates go down in the Catholic Church, adult conversions, every single demographic, every one of them, Bernardo, down, 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 down. Major loss of faith, a major mistake in the history of the church.
Yeah, and Paul VI said we were hoping for a spring within the church, but now we have a terrible winter.
Yes.
Isn't it this expression about the consequences and effects of the Second Vatican Council? And then from this scenario, this chaotic scenario, we have and still have the resistance. And you quote the St. Pius, the Society of St. Pius X, St. Peter's, and all other movements that are trying to recover the, so to speak, lost church in the past. So is this important to
well, I don't know what the situation is in Brazil. By the way, I've realized more and more over the past couple of years that Brazil really is the anchor in South America. And I think in the church too. I'm really starting to sense that, and as I talk to more people, that really the Southern Hemisphere is Brazil. Y'all need to keep up your good work and keep praying and keep praying that rosary and going to mass and fasting and all that, because you guys are important. And I think with what's going on in the how to fight this back and to call out these heretics is this devotional element. It's calling us back to what is it? What did our grandparents and our great grandparents do that was successful, where almost everyone in the next generation was a Catholic? They may not have been the best Catholic, you may have had alcoholics or broken marriages, but the Catholic faith continued. It passed on to the next generation. Something happened, or suddenly that began to stop. And so people are confused. In America, there's some options. I go through the book. Okay, if you realize that the Catholic Church is in a big mess, what are your options? Okay, you could just become an atheist and say, this whole thing's a joke, I give up. You could become a Protestant, an evangelical, and just say, well, I just want Jesus in the Bible. Forget this church, forget popes, cardinals, all these things. Just give me Jesus in the Bible. And I explain why that's not historical and not an accurate form of Christianity. You could become Eastern Orthodox. I want sacraments, I want liturgy, I want all this, but I don't want a pope. The pope's a problem. That's Eastern Orthodox. We also have sede vacantis in America. I don't know if it's a big deal in Brazil. But
yeah, we have some, but we have now a lot of Catholics that are becoming Orthodox now. It's a big problem. Yeah.
You do, okay. Yeah. Sede vacantis is traditional Roman Latin Mass Catholics, but they don't believe there's been a pope since 1958. That's an option. Some people are saying Benedict XVI is still the pope, Francis is not the pope. So I go through all of these options, and I say, look, the safe way here is to continue in the Catholic Church, realize it's in a big, big mess. So you recognize the pope, you recognize the hierarchy, but you resist. It's the recognize and resist position, R&R. I don't know what it would be in Portuguese, but recognize and resist. So we resist. We don't disobey on trivial matters. We disobey on doctrinal matters, moral matters. So if, for example, in America, the Archbishop of DC told all of his priests they all should go out and protest in the streets with the Black Lives Matter protests. Do they have to obey that? Is that something that they owe their obedience, that they have to go and take part in a political movement? Is that what their priesthood means, or can they disobey that? So you can still recognize the Archbishop and resist orders. And that's been going on. I think Catholics, in a way, have been having to learn how to do that for 50 or 60 years. And so the way I think we resist is not by having signs and chanting and doing protests. The way we resist is we just reaffirm what was always Catholic. The rosary. Your great-grandma and your great-grandpa, they all prayed the rosary. They all went to Mass on Sunday. They all celebrated the holy days, right? They all affirmed some kind of vocation, priest, nun, brother, husband, wife. They lived sacrificial lives. They honored Christ, the saints, all these things. That's what we need to do. All the new stuff of, introducing into Christianity things like labyrinths and yoga and New Age and all this nonsense needs to stop. We need to go back to the traditional norms of piety, because that's what the saints have given us. They said, this is what worked for me. This made me into a saint. This is what you should do. Why would we ever break from the formula? Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. This is one thing that we must stress in our Catholic lives, Taylor. And just before we end this interview, I think one major point that you wrote in your book is about the St. Gallen Mafia. Because we started with all that process of the smoke of Satan, which is a spiritual influence within the church, and then Masonry, secret societies, modernism, communism, and then the perversion of the liturgy and everything. And we end up now with this LGBTQI1, 2 plus, everything else within the church. And we see this like it's almost universal within the church. In Brazil, we have great problems with that. And then you use the example of the ex-cardinal Theodore McCarrick. And how important is to talk about this? So what is the influence of this St. Gallen Mafia within the church, Dr. Taylor?
So Aleister Crowley is a occultist. He's actually on the cover of the Beatles album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. He was into alchemy. He was into magic. He was into polytheism and Egyptian gods, and he created a Gnostic Catholic Church and a Gnostic Catholic Mass, and it's a complete sacrilege. It's a mockery of the Mass, and its headquarters actually was in Switzerland, not far from St. Gallen. And what we find is in the 50s. And then in the 60s, Theodore McCarrick is visiting to this region. Maybe he's recruited. We don't know. We don't know what happened at this time. One of his victims, James Grimes, says he does believe that he was recruited by someone. And we know that also that Crowley had sex magic. That was a big part of his liturgy and of his he was also a communist. But sex magic is a big part of it as well, and the occult and divinities and gods and all these horrible things. So this is happening in headquarters in Switzerland, near a town called St. Gallen. And then we learn that these liberal cardinals, bishops, and archbishops have been meeting every year in St. Gallen, Switzerland, in order to undermine Pope John Paul II and to choose his successor. This was admitted in the biography of Cardinal Daniels, who's one of the most liberal, pro-abortion, pro-unnatural marriage cardinals that ever was, and was also involved in a pedophilia scandal. He says that he even calls it the St. Gallen Mafia, that they were meeting together and they wanted to get a pope who would open to women's ordination, socialism, uniting Europe, the EU, changing liturgy, all the things that are kind of bubbling up right now in the Catholic Church. That's what they were all about at the St. Gallen Mafia. Now, they didn't get it because Benedict XVI became the next pope, but they made sure somehow that Benedict stepped down, and then they put in their man, Bergoglio, Papa Franciscus, Pope Francis. So that's the section on the St. Gallen Mafia, and that is kind of a conspiracy theory, except for the fact that Cardinal Daniels, who was a leader of it and who was present and who was there, actually says, yeah, that's what was going on. So you can't really call it a conspiracy theory of something that we think happened when one of the leaders actually says, yes, it did happen.
Yeah. And Brazilians, they usually, the Brazilian Catholics, they do not know this, the St. Gallen Mafia. When I explain them what it is, they say, Bernardo, I think you are a kind of despair, you're creating ideas in your mind. It's, this debate in the United States, everybody who's concerned about the church knows this. Everybody. In Europe, everybody knows it. In Brazil, the ideas are discussed 10 years later.
Right.
one time in YouTube, when I published a video about the LGBT mafia in our church, YouTube just excluded my video within, I don't know, 1 hour.
Yes.
I had a huge problem to put it back again because I did nothing but reading news and testimonies and documents and everything else, and testimonies that bishops and cardinals and priests did to me. They talked to me about this, and everybody knows. Here in our church, here in Londrina, where I live, in Brazil, we have a priest that passed the HIV virus to a faithful of his church. We had this problem, and the bishop didn't do anything, and this priest is, I don't know, celebrating mass here in our town.
Ridiculous.
Yes, ridiculous. We have this problem all over Brazil, and in America too, with the McCarrick case in Europe and all of that. So I think this is an issue that Catholics must talk about it. We cannot be afraid of that and scream. Yeah? And here's the wolf. There's the wolf. That's a call that we have to answer. And Taylor, to end this great interview, I'd like you to give a word to our Brazilian friends here and what you have to say to them about your book, which is very important. So the word is with you.
I'd like to say to the people of Brazil, Catholics of Brazil, you are the hub. You are the center. As I studied for this book, and I read, for example, about, resistance in the 1970s, I'm thinking Marcel Lefebvre, I realized that Brazil was a major traditionalist holdout. The people of Brazil, in so many places, held true to tradition, true to doctrine, to Catholicism after the Second Vatican Council. I'm not wrong about that, am I, Bernardo?
No.
So I think that you in Brazil have this legacy, and I think that you need to continue to carry that torch, and I think you need to prayerfully demand and ask and beg for the traditional sacraments, the traditional rites, traditional formation for your priests, traditional formation for young men and women as they get married, so that they can prosper in holy matrimony and have beautiful families and beautiful children, and be successful and have happiness. So I think in the past 50, 60 years of all the nations, Brazil has been one of the places of light and of carrying this torch. And I don't know exactly what it's like today, Bernardo, but as I read church history and what was going on in the 60s and the 70s and the early 80s, Brazil keeps coming up again and again with good priests and good bishops and good people. So I would hope that they'll continue to keep that legacy alive. And I think maybe reading Infiltration, or as it's called in Portuguese, Infiltrados, will maybe help them see how Brazil is part of this plan that God has. And we didn't talk about it too much, Bernardo, but to win this back, it's not over. We can win it back. And at the end, I talk about strategies of how we can win back. And I think Brazil will be a very key piece in this puzzle.
Very good, because I think that one of the things that people don't see in all this plot is that, yes, they have won some battles during these years, but we have one thing that they don't have. We can multiply vocations. They cannot. They can only parasite our vocations.
Right. Exactly.
So they are going to die someday. They are going to die. They are going to pass, so to speak. And the priests and the young religious people, with men and women that are now starting their religious life, they are going to endure. They endure to create another vocations and more vocations. And we are going to pass this. But the important thing is just knowing that we cannot stop our fight. We must continue. We must be even stronger, even more faithful and devoted to Our Lady, our Lord, and all the saints, and to know the doctrine. So, Dr. Taylor, I thank you very much for this interview. I think that Brazilian Brazilians and Catholics are going to be enlightened by your knowledge and your help. And you, Brazilian, that you are hearing this, please buy the book. The link to my bookshop is here in the description. And if you are not a Brazilian, buy the English book in the Amazon and give a very good revision in the Amazon so the book can be well rated. So, Dr. Taylor Marshall, thank you very much, and may the God bless us all.
Bernardo, thank you so much. God bless you.